Hello and welcome to Lone Star Silver Screen, a podcast about everything that exists at the intersection of Texas and the movies. I'm your host, Austin Zook, and on today's episode, I am interviewing writer-director J.T. Walker about his new film, Broken Land. The movie stars David Morse as a recluse, a Texas rancher who accidentally shoots a pregnant migrant worker who is crossing his land and ends up caring for her and keeping her safe from his son, who is a Border Patrol agent. I think this is a really wonderful film. It's a beautiful indie. It has some titanic performances at its center, and it was shot right here in the Lone Star State. So I'm going to jump to my conversation with JT without any further ado, but I highly recommend you seek this movie out. It is available on demand today. Again, the movie is called Broken Land. The director and writer is J.T. Walker, and this is our conversation. Where did this project begin for you?
Okay, I'll tell you exactly, but this is a weird answer. It begins when I started working on this project when I was 6, and I was lying in bed in my grandparents' ranch house in South Texas, listening to the wind blowing off of the Gulf of Mexico in the screen and at night, and a little nervous because I only went out there, my grandparents lived out there, so I didn't go out. I wasn't out there all the time, so I wasn't totally used to the complete blackness of the night out there where there's like no neighbors for miles, and you hear a knock on the door and it's very scary. And then you hear your grandparents go to the door and like a bunch of people speaking Spanish and your grandparents. And then you go out and you see like some people standing out in the back. And then you go back in bed and they're like, oh, it's okay with some people, like they're traveling north and we, talk to them and they're sleeping in the barn. And then they're gone the next morning. That's where it began.
That is incredible. So you held on to that for a long time, obviously.
That had that fired my imagination. Even at the time. First of all, being at the ranch house, I was susceptible. And my grandparents' house it's probably the only house that has been in my family and my whole life because my parents moved often and then were divorced, and I don't have a big family, or I do have a big family, but no siblings. So that house was the one house. And also I lived out of state with my mom for 9 months out of the year. So every time I'd come back, Texas was kind of like supercharged in a way for me, even though I was born and raised here until I was 8. And then but sort of half. So coming back was always very loaded. So being out there, definitely fired my imagination. And then I always had wondered about those people, like who they were, where they came from, where they were going, why they were making this, what seemed and seems like an insane journey. Something we don't talk, like immigration. I mean, regardless of the politics, like pro, con, whatever, that all aside, these people are embarking on this insane. It's like Homeric, epic in the fullest sense of the word. And that always was just like, I always thought about that. So, and then later the project, so I had always wanted to make a film out there. I also had been a screenwriter for many years. After the 2008 crash, I started working as a professor, and I finally decided I was going to make a feature come hell or high water. And I knew I could shoot on the ranch, and I also had always wanted to shoot on the ranch. So I had $50,000 and I was going to make this same film on the ranch with 5 buddies and some non-professional actors. And in a way, I think that could have been really interesting. Like, I don't know that would have, that could have been a great film. But a friend who has a production company here read the script and sent it to their investor. And the investor, who's a really amazing man, and his family, amazing family, they loved the script. And so they invested in it. And then some other people invested in it as well, which is why we were able to get David Morse and shoot on, not that we shot on any kind of extravagant level, but we shot, more at a higher level than I had originally intended. So
I wanted to ask you about the shooting, because this is a beautiful film. And I've spent a lot of time in like West Texas and South Texas, and you guys do a really great job of capturing the landscape. And obviously, part of that is because you have built in production value. You're shooting on
Right.
your grandparents' ranch, which
Right.
helps. But I'm sure there are also a lot of conversations you're having with your cinematographer to figure out what this is going to look and feel like. Can you tell me what some of those were?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, let me introduce our cinematographer. Her name is Sarah Purgatorio. She is Italian. I actually thought she was. I wanted to find a Mexican woman cinematographer because I knew we were going to cast a Mexican young woman, and I was concerned that she wouldn't speak a lot of English, and I didn't want her to feel vulnerable or alone on set. I
Mhm.
wanted there to be someone who was always present, who was in a position of some power. I found, and Sarah had lived in Mexico for 10 years, shot a couple of features there. Unbeknownst to me, she'd already moved back to Italy. So when I contacted her, I thought she was in Mexico, but she was in Rome. In any case, she's really extraordinary. Sarah, I mean, what I really love, and it's hard to put your finger on, but I think I'm really inspired by the work of filmmakers like Chloe Zhao and the beautiful naturalism, sort of heightened naturalism.
Mhm.
I would call it lyrical naturalism, where everything is very much authentic. You're looking for those. I mean, we are augmenting, we're putting props in place and so on and so forth. But a lot of what we're doing is finding the beauty that's there and
Yeah.
augmenting it by shooting it in a certain light. And so we very much Sarah's extremely talented, and of course we were very careful to shoot in certain lighting conditions. So we only shot we shot at magic hour, basically outside. All the exterior shots are magic hour. They're all backlit. Obviously they're composed in a certain way. We're very, very conscious of shooting it in a lyrical but naturalistic way. So yes, there were many conversations about it.
Well, and you mentioned David Morse earlier. I want to talk
Yes.
to you about the cast. So, how much did his character change from your original conception to what ended up on screen? I mean, were you guys having conversations to figure that guy out, or was it basically, what you envisioned is what he brought to the table?
Well, what's interesting, that's a good question. And I pictured David Morse when I was writing the script.
Okay.
So it actually didn't change that much. I mean, of course, it got way better and way more complex and so much richer. But it changed in depth, but not in direction.
Yeah.
So I had seen David. I actually, David, a lot of people know him from, I guess, but Saint Elsewhere and all these. I'd never seen those films, actually. For a long time, I had a bias. I just watched really obscure indie films. So, like, I had seen him in this movie at Sundance called The Slaughter Rule, made by the Smith brothers. He plays it's in rural Montana. He plays a football coach, and Ryan Gosling. It's one of his very first films. He's amazing in it also. And I always remember David from that. And then Sean Penn's film Indian Runner. He's
Hmm.
the lead in he's one of the two leads in that. And for some reason, and then I'd seen him recently in a couple of smaller films, and he was just his authenticity. I mean, the thing about David, and I've said this in a lot of screenings, Jacqueline Bejarano, who's the
Yeah.
Mexican actress, they're incapable of being inauthentic.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this a lot. The film deals in archetypes, and a bad archetype is a cliche.
Right.
And so if you want your archetype to live and not be a cliche, it has to be grounded in absolute authenticity. And so I knew I needed and it's very hard to find someone who's just like incapable of falseness. And
Right.
David is incapable of falseness.
Well, and so David, obviously, you have familiarity with his work. I am guessing Jacqueline Bejarano is a discovery for you. Can you
She
tell
is.
me what that process was like?
Yeah, Jacqueline, I auditioned we auditioned, I don't know, scores of Mexican American actresses, but
Mhm.
the accent was always like you could tell that Spanish was their second language. And then ultimately, I mean, I'd always wanted to cast someone who was not living in this country. And we had a producer friend. Basically, we had submissions from a lot of different smaller casting agencies in Mexico. And then Jacqueline submitted an absolutely beautiful self-filmed. There's a scene in the film where she's talking to her aunt on the telephone, and that was the audition piece that she used. And literally the casting director, who's like cast hundreds of movies, wrote me and she's like, this one, I cried. Like I cried at this audition. And, once I saw that, it was just like, there was nobody else. So we
Right.
actually then things got a lot more complicated, right? Because she's Mexican. So it was way more complicated. We had to do all the visa stuff. We had to, we shot a scene in Mexico, which isn't in the film, so that we could say that the project began in Mexico and, which enabled us to bring her here, because otherwise we actually would not have been able to get her into the country. So yeah, but both she and David, long story short, I'm sorry to go on, but David was, as I said, my first choice. And then luckily the casting process circled back around and we were able to get him. So I was very excited about it.
Well, they're magical together on screen. I mean,
I
I think
agree.
the dynamic between them is incredible. Can you tell me a little bit about what the process was like on set to find that? Or, I mean, did they just hit it off the second they met?
They hit it off the second they met. Jacqueline doesn't speak English very well. So, but she's incredibly empathic and present. This is her first film. She's a theater actress in Mexico, but there was almost no break-in period, quote unquote. She's like very, very disciplined, but also just one of those, naturally gifted people. David fell in love with her, professionally speaking, right off the bat,
Yeah.
because she is just so present that, and so is David, that they immediately fell into like an incredible, very, very natural, authentic interaction. So, I mean, they did spend, David came a week early and had spent, obviously he's from the East Coast, so he had never been in this kind of environment. And he spent a week on his own with a local rancher who's a family friend who we shot a couple scenes on, but
Mhm.
JW Atkinson, and he went with JW every day, all day, and like fed the cattle, fixed the
Mhm.
fences, all on his own. So that by the time, and Jacqueline, because of the visa issue, we didn't get her to the last minute. He was very comfortable. So for him, sinking into the character was very. David can't operate from a false premise, basically.
Sure.
So he had to do the research. And then when Jacqueline arrived, I think they really helped each other because they're both so good that it just, they have to react to each other. Acting is reacting, and they just were giving each other so much. And it really was right off the bat.
So the other major relationship in the film is between Morse's character and his character's son, who's a border
Right.
patrol agent played by Bill Heck.
Exactly.
They have a very different kind of relationship than what he develops
Yeah.
with this migrant worker who he saves. What was it like, kind of filming those scenes and building that out with those performers? Because it is a little more antagonistic.
It is definitely a lot more antagonistic. And all of it, finding that tone was tricky and
Yeah,
good in a good way, like an interesting tricky, because Bill is also incredible, but he's a much more, I wouldn't say that, you can't, he's just more aware of his technique.
yeah.
So, he's a theater actor. So he's very, very, he has a lot of technique and he's using it in a good way. So he was very aware of like, well, I love him, but I am also like filled with, I'm furious with him, so he's like, we would do takes and he would be like, well, I'm too withering there. I'm just, I'm trying to destroy him. And then another take where it would be too vulnerable and soft. And, it's like trying to, and then talking about the backstory and the circumstances that David doesn't like to. I wouldn't say Bill does either, but Bill did really want to talk a lot before we
Yeah.
shot. Like, what's the backstory? David, there's a lot more information about him in the script. So in that sense, he didn't have to ask me as many questions. And we really only talked as things came up. Whereas Bill, there's not that much information. So it's like, what have I been doing? What's my trajectory? How often do I see him? Et cetera. So we did a lot of talking and a lot of playing on set where we probably did more takes with Bill than with anyone else, not because they weren't good, but because they were different. Like
Right.
this take would be a certain way, another take would be a certain way. And we were trying to find thread the needle.
So I wanted to ask as well. I mean, this is your first time directing a feature at this
Yeah.
scale. It sounds like you're pretty comfortable working with the actors and giving them what they need to get what you need. Was there anything in this process that was a little harder for you to wrap your arms around, or anything that you wish you could go back and do differently now?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, I would definitely not say it was easy. It was incredibly challenging and
Yeah.
intense. I have been involved in filmmaking and taught filmmaking for a long time. I'd worked with actors. It's not easy. And there are certainly times, I could teach I could talk and teach. It's often because I've taught, I'm like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of lessons I could share.
Sure.
But, I would say though that the things that I would change are more script things.
Okay.
I think I don't wanna there's some script things I would change because I think looking back, I maybe pulled some punches that I could have just let land completely.
Yeah.
But that's, I think we're all learning as we go. I feel I'm very proud. I feel it's a good film. I did my absolute best with what I had at the time. And, someone said like, how do you know when something's done? And it's like, it's done when I have no control. It's only, I can't go back and rewrite the script now. I have to let that.
Right.
But there are things that I might do if I were able to like snap my fingers. Yeah.
Were there any happy accidents on set? Anything you
Oh,
weren't planning to
so many.
capture that you? Yeah.
So many, yeah. I mean, Sarah, and this is what I mean about, and this is a thing I love about shooting, like one of the things about shooting films altogether is just when something, like for example, that shot, I don't know if you'll remember this, but there's a shot when David is it's after he comes home drunk and she puts him in bed. And then the next morning he's walking out in front of the house. It's actually one of the more beautiful shots in the film. It's a very beautiful shot. It's one of the most beautiful shots in the film, I think.
Yes.
He's walking as a t-shirt and he walks out and he faces away from the camera into the dawn and he's just kind of standing there by himself. And the idea is that that's like, he's kind of like, that's a moment of reckoning. He's like that. And then you see him next and he's changed, right? Like
Yeah.
he's come around, like he's now going to accept her in, like sort of welcome her in a way that he hadn't before. That shot was a total Sarah, screaming in Italian, like, we must shoot. It is too beautiful. It is beautiful. Get the camera. David, you stand there. You walk. I don't care. Walk. Yeah, like
I
that.
love that.
Yeah, really. Totally. That shot is Sarah. 100%.
Well, I know we're almost out of time. I only had 2 questions left. So
Yeah.
the next one was, I mean, there's a lot of quiet in this film. I mean, it draws you in. It's really beautiful and really moving. I can't tell you enough good things about this movie. But what I wanted to ask was that ever a concern for you? Did you ever feel like,
The
is this going
quietness.
to be too quiet?
Yes, I would say it's less quiet now than it was. I mean, I like slow cinema.
Yeah.
So there was a cut of the film that was 2 hours and I liked it. But I really interrogated myself and I still don't know if we found the right answer. I mean, it might have been better at 2 hours. Certainly slower, certainly quieter, maybe more immersive, maybe
Yeah.
less. Even though it's quiet, there's still like a fair amount. The forward momentum is palpable in a way that I think, is good.
Yeah.
I think there could have been in a certain way, I think it could have been both quieter and less quiet. Like, I think there's certain things that I have thought about in terms of like the story that might have introduced another kind of underlying tension that would have allowed me to actually make it slower. And I
Yeah.
like that. So is it too quiet? We were concerned that it would be too slow paced.
Yeah.
So we sped it up. And
Well,
I'm glad that there's still openness. What I really love that just the sense of openness. Like, I don't want the plot to be like claustrophobic.
yeah. And I would say that where you ended up, it does not feel like slow cinema at all. I mean, it's quiet, but it moves and it's
Yeah.
very engrossing. The last question. So I end
Yes.
every episode of this show because it's all about Texas and the movies. I
Right.
ask my guests, what's something you love about Texas?
Oh, God, man. Here's the thing. There's a lot of things I could say. The thing I like the warmth, like the people, the warmth
Yeah.
I always think of them as a little bit, a lot of tech, not, but there's a, how to put it in a positive way, because it is a positive thing. There's just a liveliness.
Yeah.
Like when I was living on the East Coast, I was living in New York, and you look around and you realize like you're the loudest person in the room, and you're like a little bit, bigger than life, and you're like, I'm Texan, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't fit in here. I mean, it's great. It's great. Nothing wrong with New York, but it's like I always was like, God, I got to hold it in a little bit. Whereas if I'm at a bar with my friends in Austin, we're yucking it up. There's like it fits in, and I love that warmth and the rollicking. There's a little bit of just more rollicking quality, which I like.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, hey, that's a great answer. Thank you so much for taking the time, man. This was
Yeah,
great.
Austin,
Congrats.
total pleasure. Thanks, buddy. Good to
You
see
got
you.
it. Take care.
See you around town. Bye bye.
Yes. Bye. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed the show, please remember to rate, review, and follow us wherever it is you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at Lone Star Film Pod. We'll be back soon with another new episode, but in the meantime, we'll see you at the movies and on the dusty trails of Texas. Bye.